Hello, America. Welcome to your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. I am the chief. And much like my two guests today, I'm happily retired. Um, we do have two great guests, two friends of mine on the show, both retired California Highway Patrol. And just real quick, we have a retired officer, Kevin Baxter, retired Sergeant Mark Gomez. Now, by the way, this Mark is spelled the wrong way with a C. It's not the proper spelling, but he's still a great guy. Glad to have him on. Kevin, Mark, welcome to your Leo Nation, and thanks for being aboard today.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So, real quick, I just want to, I'm going to give you just a little brief background on each of these gentlemen, and then I'm going to turn over to them so they can tell you a little more about their backgrounds. But actually, Mark really was I consider my first real boss from the Highway Patrol, because Mark was assigned to the California Highway Patrol Academy when I was a cadet there, and he was one of my physical training or PT instructors. And we actually had a good conversation offline, the three of us, yesterday. And boy, there was some stuff to reminisce about. But Mark, I know you were there as an officer. Actually, you just got there about 2 classes before I reported. So you were a new PT instructor, and there I was, a cadet. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you did there as a PT instructor officer and later on as a sergeant.
Well, I came on the Highway Patrol in 1983. I was assigned to the Newhall area. From the Newhall area, I ended up transferring to the Redwood City area. There I did that's where I started my, basically the part of my career that had to do with physical methods of arrest and use of force. 1986, I became an area instructor, and then got on motors for a little while. Then from there, I was assigned to the academy in 1990, late 90, and was there till 95. So as a PT instructor, a lot of agencies call them DT instructors, defensive tactics instructors. We did physical training with the cadets in the morning, and then later on in the day, we do physical methods of arrest, use of force with the cadets. So a lot of people get confused. They think that the primary job of a PT instructor is the physical training, and even though it's a major aspect of it, our primary job was defensive tactics, use of force. And so I did that until 95. 95 I left, went to Oakland, where I spent most of my career, and I promoted in Oakland, went into investigations, back to Contra Costa, and got on the motor for a third time in Contra Costa. And then from there I finished my career off with the Highway Patrol at the academy, and I was assigned to the physical training staff again when I was in charge of, I had approximately 5 to 6 instructors, and I worked with those instructors and continued training cadets. We had classes up as high as 240 per class, running double classes at a time. So we had a lot of work to do. We did a lot of work while we were there. And it took that up until my time when I retired in 2011, at the end of 2011.
You know, it's and Kevin, we're gonna get to you in a second here, but Mark, you hit on something that's really important. And as I learned, obviously, as a cadet, as your cadet, you weren't just physical training instructors. Obviously, that really set the foundation in a lot of ways. Physically, obviously, mental, really mindset, really learning not to quit. But I think, in a sharper sense, your job was to teach us how to protect ourselves, our partners, and to survive out there with what was called then physical methods of arrest and enforcement tactics, which, Kevin, we're going to get to you because you guys work closely together, the respective units. So it's really, really important. Kevin, you are the three out of the three of us. You are the junior guy here. You
I
came
am
on.
the boot.
You are the boot, relatively speaking here, but you and I met actually. We actually met before I promoted into West Valley, and I can't remember exactly when that was. But you and I first worked together when I was a brand new sergeant. I promoted in 2004 into West Valley, where you were working, and that's where we became acquainted. I'll let you talk about what I'm going to say right now, and of course, your lovely wife, who's 2 years senior to you, actually retired at the same rank that I did, a chief, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. And by the way, April, your wife and I work together at division headquarters. So talk about kind of being all in the family here, so to speak. I've known you and your family for a while, and
A
it's
long
been
time.
a good time, a long time. So tell us about your background. And one of the things that Mark touched on is the amount of time that he spent in the field. And I know you did as well, and I did as well. And it's very important to what we're going to talk about today. So Kevin, go ahead and take it away.
So I joined the Highway Patrol in November. I was sworn in as an officer in November of 1996 and reported to West Los Angeles. I did about uh, 4 years there, give or take. And then in 2001, shortly before 9/11, I transferred to West Valley and worked there, predominantly patrol. I did do a 2-year stint reviewing AI reports when my wife promoted. I kind of
And
had to have a
that's
schedule for the
accident
kids.
investigation, folks. AI. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crash investigation now, because of
Yeah.
the schedule for the kids. And then stayed on patrol the rest of the time I was there. And in 2018, I transferred to the Willows area, which is up north in the middle of the sticks of California, Northern California. And in 2021, I transferred to the Chico area and was there for a few months until in September of 2022, I went to the academy. I was fortunate enough to be selected as an instructor for the Enforcement Tactics Unit, and went to the academy where I did 2 years and retired in last last September or last August. The end of August was my last day working last year, 2024. So I finished kind of
And
like Mark. I finished, you know, wrote it out at the academy. I hadn't been there before, but it was. I loved working patrol, but being at the academy and working with the cadets, it was just a great environment. So I kind of, finished where I started, so to speak.
well, it's interesting, and I think one of the things um, when we talked a day or so ago, um, one of the things that the three of us have in common is the amount of time we spent in the field, and you're talking about how rewarding it was for you, Kevin, to be an instructor at the academy. And I've got to guess that a lot of that reward feeling comes from the fact that you had so much time in the field. In other words, you feel that you have a lot to offer. You're confident in what you're saying as it relates to specifically policy, but you're also able to translate that into practicality. Okay, here's what policy says, here's what we have to do, blah, blah. Here's the foundation. But not every single thing you encounter out there is going to be right here in this HPM or this GO. It's not going to be there. That's why we give you a badge and a gun. We swear you in because we think that you have enough common sense and integrity to do the right thing. And I think for both of you, and knowing both of you so well, I know you feel the same way I do. But this is this is going to we really want to cover kind of the evolution. I think it has been over the last really 40 years, Mark, going back to your time over 40 years ago when we started with the patrol. Kevin, tell us a little bit about the role of the enforcement tactics instructor at the academy.
So the Enforcement Tactics Unit is part of the tactical training program at the academy. Uh, so is PT's wrapped up into that, or where Sergeant Gomez was. Um, and so we worked very well, or we worked closely hand in hand with the PT staff on a lot of stuff. So um, as where PT or defensive tactics is, you know, Mark mentioned, it's what a lot of other agencies call it. They learn, arrest techniques, search techniques, um, the approved, techniques you'll use when you're out in the field. And then with that, and then a lot of the other stuff that the curriculum is taught or that's taught at the academy, enforcement tactics kind of wraps it all up. And the kind of the phrase we use is, we're going to teach you how and when to use this, and so for everything else you've learned. And so
Mm-hmm.
it was use of force. We were responsible for instructing the cadets in state use of force law, the types and levels of force they can use given the resistance of the suspect, and as well as responding to crimes in progress, vehicle stops. So the meat and potatoes of what they're going to be actually doing, and then how they take everything else they've learned and then put it into the implementation of being a patrol officer with the highway patrol.
Yeah, that's really a good concise. I think being a layperson, because I never worked in enforcement tactics, but of course I was subject to what you and your predecessors taught in the academy as a cadet. Now, Mark, Kevin made a good point about basically he was telling you when or when not, when you can or can't do something, when you can't actually apply the tools that you've learned really from the physical training staff, because along with you, along with EVOC, emergency vehicle operations course, driving a car, our firearms instructors, those courses, those are all teaching the practical side, the physical side about how to implement things that Kevin's unit and Kevin taught about enforcement contacts. Is that a fair assessment?
Definitely.
It,
We would work, one of the things that was really important, especially when I went back as a sergeant, um, the sergeants from those units, we all got together and we made sure that we were on the same page, that we weren't teaching one thing that was being taught different by another, another unit. So it was really important that we maintain that communication so as to not confuse the cadets or give them, information, you know, uh, that might be wrong or, something along those lines. So it was really important that communication between units.
that's a really good point. And obviously, when I was there as a cadet, I mean, one of the reasons I think that I was able to get through the academy with as little, not no stress, but with minimal stress, is because I knew that um, all the instructors there had to put on somewhat of a show for us. In other words, you have to create stress, because if a cadet cannot handle stress in the academy, how are they going to handle it on the 405 or the 5 or I-80 or wherever, some county road, or enter a house by themselves? And I think a lot of cadets don't get that. So, hey, you know what? These guys and gals are doing what they have to do to train us in a lot of ways. But I don't think I really considered how much the different units had to communicate. I'm really glad you brought this up, Mark. And by the way, Kevin, if you want to say Gomez or Garrett, you can have it. I know this
Okay.
names can be kind of confusing. By the way, I had a classmate, and I'm sure it's not the only time for you, Mark. I had a classmate, um, last name was Gomez, like our guest today. And at the time, Officer Gomez said, "You are no longer Cadet Gomez. You are now Cadet Gomerez." So he wanted to make sure there was distinction. We wouldn't confuse anybody. I'll never forget that. But was there, have you remember that, Mark?
Oh, I remember it just because I told him that he wasn't allowed to use the Gomez name. And
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
I think I actually nicknamed his name was Gomer, and he had to
Yeah, I
put
think
an R
eventually it
instead of
became
instead of a Z. And then the problem was he wasn't really really sharp guy. So on his forms at the academy, he started putting Gomer down as on his forms. And when the staff office came to him and said, "You can't spell your name," he goes, "No, I was told by Officer Gomez that I had to change my name." So they actually had to bring the guy in, and I had to tell him that for official forms, he could put his real name on there. But this just that just
I
funny
see.
story.
I am literally tearing up. I'm not making this
Yeah.
up. And this is one of the reasons I think the chemistry was just great, from my point of view, because you guys know I'm a total jackass. I like to be a cut up. I like to walk that that thin line of getting fired or having fun. And so when I'm seeing this stuff going on, I'm there. I know I'm getting off track here, but this is great because I'm there, like in the gym, down the mat, and I'm hearing this stuff. And I'm doing my nose in the rings, push ups, sit ups, whatever. And half time I'm just laughing out loud. I can't. I said, "This is awesome. I loved it." And but I'll never forget that. We talked about some other things maybe we won't discuss today that happened while
Yeah.
we were there in the academy. But
Who knew that
but
who knew that an instructor at the academy had the legal authority to change somebody's last name, right? I mean, it just
exactly.
yeah.
Well, who knew?
Yeah.
Gomer apparently knew. I
Yeah,
should have
yeah,
knew.
yeah. This is
Oh
hey.
man, Cadet Gomer. But so going back to serious stuff. Um, was there ever like any serious debate with the instructors, Mark? Like, it got to the point where, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, and had to take it to a higher level. You go, to headquarters to get this resolved, or were things for the most part? And again, I knew you were there for a long time over two separate periods, but was there pretty good like coordination and camaraderie with the staff, or was there a lot of infighting? From a point of, I think this is the right way to go.
I think when I was there, especially when I was there as a sergeant, I got to see things from a different perspective as you do from an officer, and I felt that we had a really good line of communication within the tactical unit. Uh, the academic unit, we used to call them the nerd herd, and sometimes they would sometimes try to interject a little bit into tactics, and sometimes they were wrong in what they were giving the cadets. So we'd have to have discussions with those units and say, hey, be careful what you're saying, type of thing, because it goes into conflict with what we're teaching. So things like that. But for the most part, we had a really really good line of communication within the units at the academy, up into the captains, that I worked with, especially as a sergeant, because again, I was exposed to something different as a sergeant that I wasn't as an officer.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's another great point, Kevin. You concur with that, or was it a little different environment when you were there a few years
No,
later?
even though there's a gap in time there, I have the same opinions. There would be, they were minimal, but there was an occasional time where, you know, something that the academic side of the academy was teaching, and the cadets would come to us, and then we'd be doing something with them, and you'd look at them and say, what are you doing? Well, that's the way that, I was taught over here, and we'd have to go and square that away. But as far as like with PT and the range and even EVOC, and to a lesser extent, but you know, enforcement tactics worked with PT and the range, and we cross helped each other all the time. It was the only time in my career I was ever really involved in a small unit, and the interaction between the various units at the academy was just, it was what made it fun being there. We all worked together, and if there was a disagreement, we worked it out. Like Sergeant Gomez said,
Mm-hmm.
that hey, let's have a round table and discuss this, and then we'd come to an agreement. Because there is always going to be the chance of an interpretation
Right.
discrepancy between but it always worked out in a positive. And again, I was only there 2 years, but I loved working. I don't know where they were, Sarge, when you were at the academy, but enforcement tactics was right outside the back door to the gym. So we had, you know, front row seats to pickup day for the cadets. And then, it was a short walk across to talk to you guys and vice versa. So I loved it. I've got no complaints about being at the academy at all, and the people I worked with and the
Well, if
environment
someone,
that was there.
yeah, I appreciate that, Kevin. I think if someone asked me, hey, how was the continuity of the staff when you were a cadet there, I would give the same assessment you guys did from an insight point of view. I think that speaks very highly of the CHP and certainly of the command staffs, respectively, that you guys worked for over the years, that a cadet here didn't notice infighting if there was, or maybe because there wasn't. And that's why this came up to me today, Mark, when you said something earlier. I thought, yeah, how did they get along, behind the scenes? And I think the reason that we as cadets didn't notice is because you guys did a really, really good job of being on the same page. I said that, look, and by the way, I feel that way about the department in general over the years. I really do. And, having, when April will tell you, of course, I'm sure she does, and certainly did while she was working, Kevin, about, yeah, you know what, I got into it so-and-so today. And these are sometimes personal, like I said, interpretations and things like this about how we should do this, how we should move forward. But I think the Highway Patrol does a great job in it with structure, with chain of command, and with practice. And I mean that, with practice, doing the same thing over and over and over, and things change slowly. Having said that, I think we're all in agreement that things have changed, and the tectonic plates move very slowly, but over a given period of time, there's huge changes, and not just with the CHP, but obviously over the last 40 years, things in law enforcement training has changed. I think for the most part, it's been it's gotten better and better for the most part, not necessarily completely. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today was the change in law enforcement, really based on quite frankly politics, culture, and not necessarily on, say, learning from a Newhall incident or learning from an FBI shootout in Florida, um, but maybe changing because of kind of bending the knee. No pun intended for those idiot police chiefs who knelt down in front of Black Lives Matter in 2020. But it's exactly what I'm talking about. And kind of going back to you, Mark, because again, you have 7 years on the job before me, and of course, I worked with a lot of guys. I worked with guys, and you more so than me, but I worked with guys that came on like in the mid 1960s when I reported to, back then it was called Verdugo Hills. And so I want to talk about, just anecdotally, what changes really stand out to you from the time you came on until the time you retired not too long ago with law enforcement in general, as far as how officers interact with the public, what level of force they use, any aspect of it you want. What's your take on the changes, good or bad, or both?
The biggest takeaway I have is that, well, first of all, the list is long. I mean, of differences. I'll start with attitudes first of all. Uh, the attitude of the applicant coming on to the department is a lot different. When I was an officer, um, and I had people come in, like yourselves, like your class, and those people wanted to be there. They wanted to be law enforcement. It was something, their dreams they've had since they were kids, a lot of them, or something that happened when they're teens, something along those lines that brought them, that attracted them to the department. It might have been a relative, whatever, but they had that dream of being there. At that time, when I came on in '83, the big thing was that was like right in the big hair nation. When you had all the rockers and everybody had long hair, and we all had short hair, and wherever we'd go, people would say to us, "Hey, you're either a cop or in the military, one of the two." We had to follow strict rules, strict guidelines for grooming, and that's just the way it was. But we wanted to do the job so bad that we didn't care. That we'd cut our hair. We would, we'd stay within policy when it came to that. We didn't have beards. We didn't do these crazy hairdos now they have. And I think a lot of it was just the attitude, and when yourself, when you came through, you had that same attitude that I did, even coming on when I did. When I went back as a sergeant, I started noticing that the attitudes started to change. I went back at the end of 2006, and now I was training people, the kids of officers that I had trained in the 90s. Now I was training their kids, and a lot of attitudes had changed. The way their expectations. It was that you started to see that type of mentality, that everybody gets a medal type of mentality, and a lot of people coming on for the wrong reasons. We saw that was when we had the big fallout with the housing market, and that was that period of time where people were losing their jobs left and right, and the only people that were hiring at that time were law enforcement. So we had a lot of mortgage brokers, a lot of real estate agents come through, and not that they were bad or anything, but they didn't have the same love for the job. They basically looked at it as a job, and I used to tell cadets all the time, hey, this is not a job. This is a career. This is something you got to want to do, because you have to be ready to you know go that extra mile when it's time to get down and dirty. And you are going to get dirty on this job. Somebody's not going to go along with instructions, with direction, and there's always that chance. So so that was like a big thing that I saw, was just the attitude in changing, that changed. And um, and I saw it starting to happen when I was a field training officer in Oakland. When I had gone to Oakland after the academy, I started seeing that a little bit more so. Um, and then I saw it at the academy too, where the attitudes, and not everyone. We've got some people that came on that are excellent, that have done it for the right reason. It's something that they've always wanted to do. It's either in their blood because of relatives, or just something that's in them, that they want to be part of the community. They want to serve the community. They want to make a difference. We still have a lot of those people, but at the same time, we have a lot of people that are in it for the wrong reason. They're in it for the medical. They're in it for the paycheck, and it shows in their performance in the field. So there has been a lot of change, a lot of attitude change.
Well, Mark, you said that the list is long, and it really is. And internally, externally, um, it's really important what you're talking about. And Kevin, I'm going to get to you in a minute with your perspective about this topic. And Mark, something you brought up reminded me of the conversation we had, and I joked about it here a few minutes ago about some of the things that as an instructor you did, some of the things as a cadet that I did. It's like not so acceptable nowadays. Again, they weren't malicious, but without ever discussing it, it was clear that you and I did share a mindset of this is a career. This is the California Highway Patrol. You either want to be here as a cadet to become an officer because you love what we stand for, you want to make a difference, or get the hell out. And there were people in my class that you and I felt maybe they shouldn't be here. Maybe they shouldn't be here. And I know I did. And a lot of my classmates did. Not because they were bad people or going to commit crimes, things like that. It's just, you know what, you got the wrong mindset. You got the wrong outlook on this. And I felt the same way. I trained 40 people, when I was an FTO in Altadena. And I had some of those people. And I could tell after 2 days, this person's not going to make it. Not because they can't do it, but because they don't really want to do what the job requires. And like you said, that was true then. It's certainly true now. And maybe because a lot of the reasons that you specified, Mark, about maybe they're coming into this profession for the wrong reasons. Maybe no fault of their own. I don't know, but we'll talk more about this because there's a lot to talk about in that topic. But back to you, Kevin. Your assessment of the evolution over the last, say, 30 years of law enforcement and CHP.
So again, not to just
By the way,
make it
say hi to
easy.
April for me.
Yeah, she just walked in the door. Um, they say hi, AP. Um, um, it- Not to just seem like I'm piggybacking on everything the Sarge says. It's
No,
just
not at all.
uh, I I remember coming on and working with. Uh, so I would start it off that I basically got an idea about the Highway Patrol because of April going through the academy. And as crazy as it's probably going to sound to the two of you guys, when she started going through accident investigation and working with templates and hand drawn diagrams and everything, I'm like, that looks kind of interesting. And then I get to shoot guns and drive cars. Uh, uh, you know, Sign me up. And I was going to be a school teacher, and that was what I was going to college for.
I
And
remember that, Kevin. We were talking about
I,
that. Yeah.
I, and April and I were just talking about it a few days ago. I had no understanding or idea or anything about what the retirement or the benefits. I mean, I knew you had health insurance because, April had it and we had a baby, but that wasn't the draw. It was, I didn't have the lifelong goal of being a cop, but, you know, seeing the aspect of the fun of it was just, and zero regrets. And then, when you get to the point that all three of us are in now and you're like, wow, it worked out great, but it wasn't an idea in my mind at the start. I remember standing in the admin building of the academy, where we had, for the viewers or the listeners, each cadet had like a little pigeonhole, which was like their mailbox, and that's where your paycheck would get put. That's where notes would get put that you had your mail, stuff like that. And my first full month at the academy, I remember pulling my paycheck out of there as a cadet and looking at that And I specifically remember the impact it had on me standing there in front of my mailbox and looking at that paycheck and going, this is the most money I've ever held in my hand at one time, other than my student loan check, which was credit. And,
Mm-hmm.
going forward in my career, guys would just, how they could give that up, and to the sergeant's point, right? Like the mindset wasn't there. I mean, you wanted to be, I think we should be held to a higher standard as police officers, right? And so, but people were there for the money. And when I went back, 20 plus years later to the academy to be an instructor, a little bit difference in the two units, between PT and enforcement tactics. PT, again, Sarge, correct me if you think I'm wrong, had a little bit more of a job of putting higher level of stress on the cadets in their curriculum. Where with us, we weren't afraid to climb on somebody if they were being a problem, but we didn't want them stressed out as bad when they came to us, because we wanted them to be able to take everything, apply it, and show us that they knew how to utilize what they had been taught. Uh, so we would, when we met the cadets for the first night, we would ask them, you know, why did you, join the high patrol? And it was amazing to me, the amount of, or the percentage of the cadets that said, well, because the pay is great and the benefits and the retirement are good, and I want to provide for my family, which again isn't it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the the reason for wanting to do to do the career changed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then just one other thing that struck me is that I wanted, so when when I went to the academy as an instructor, and the sergeant at the enforcement tactics unit, Sergeant Thomas Ponce, hired me. We had worked together in the field, throughout the years a little bit. We never worked the same area, but through training and stuff like that. And he pulled me aside and he said, you need to realize now, especially teaching what we're teaching, that it's not ask, tell, make anymore. And when I came on the job, if you had somebody that was non-compliant, it was ask them to do it, tell them to do it, and then if they didn't do it, then it was, well, we're going to make you do it. And I think that's to me one of the biggest changes. And it's not always necessarily bad, but I think that if the mindset of the officer isn't right, it causes hesitation, and that can be dangerous. So, good and bad to it, but that was one of the big things that was kind of eye-opening to me, especially going there to teach cadets. And he's like, hey, and I knew that, but having been told that now, and it kind of up front and in your face, it's not ask, tell, make anymore. It's, de-escalation is a thing, and I'm sure we'll kind of get into that.
Yeah, we will get into that, and you know, you're right. Look, when I came on, you know, I went to Los Angeles County. It wasn't the busiest area in the world that I worked. Altena, it's kind of a sleepy place in the scheme of Los Angeles County, relatively speaking. But we had City of Los Angeles, we had unincorporated, we had City of Pasadena, City of Burbank, City of Glendale, lots and lots of diverse places, geographically, culturally, economically, everything, terrain, 9,000 feet high. The point is, there was a lot going on, even though it wasn't the busiest area in the world. But one of the things, being in Los Angeles County, when I broke in, and this goes to what you guys are talking about the mindset, and that's where I wanted to go. You have the dream sheet, and I got my first choice. I was so lucky to go there. I was going back home, but there was a term that you guys used, Mark, when you were training us. It was called LA trained. For those of you going to Los Angeles, you're going to work alongside LAPD, and you're going to have people there who commit crime on a regular basis, who know how things work.
Hmm.
In other words, especially if you get stopped by LAPD, you do what you're told, or you get your ass beat to a pulp. And what happened when I start making these stops alongside LAPD, backing them up or them backing me up? That's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. And it was totally something that we weren't trained to do, CHP officers, but they wanted immediate compliance, or there was immediate action on the part of those LAPD officers. It doesn't happen anymore, not to my knowledge, but it did back in, now again, this is also just immediately post Rodney King. I was a cadet when the Rodney King incident happened, and then I reported to where the Rodney King accident happened, Altadena. And but LAPD, you have to remember, some of these guys they come back, they come on in the 1960s as well. Probably not many of them that they're actually still on patrol, but certainly they come in the 1970s and 1980s. And they were going to change overnight just because of this incident. So, but we were taught this in the academy, and quite frankly, a lot of this is what I expected when I signed up to be a police officer, that I'm going to run into some really, really dangerous situations. I don't know how much that is the case anymore. In other words, with the initial mindset of applicants, I don't know. Maybe a lot of them still feel that way. But for the three of us, we wanted to be in the field. Like you said, Mark, earlier, that I literally had dreams of driving a CHP car before I got to the academy. That's what I wanted to do. I never wanted to promote. Yeah, I know that's true. But the thing is, I didn't promote for 13 years. Actually, 14 to the day I promoted. So 14 years from the time I went to the academy. So say 13 years. And 10 years, almost to the day, I spent in the field every single day before I did my first administrative job, because that's all I wanted to do. I was pushed into these other assignments. Then you turn around and train people, and my God, before they're done crapping academy food, they're working inside someplace in some special duty. They get off break-in, and it's like 9 months later, they're inside. They're inside. How is this possible? And that happened a lot, even in my time. My guess it may happen more now. One of the things we're seeing, and this goes back, I mentioned the Newhall incident. I've had Mike Wood on, by the way, who's a fantastic, he's become a great friend of mine, but a fantastic author, historian, wrote a great book about the Newhall incident in 1970. And one of the things he talked about was, in his opinion, and could not be more respectful, more reverent about these four officers that were killed in Newhall. But he does analyze things. And one of the things he talked about, a couple of years leading up to that incident, the California Highway Patrol had a massive, massive hiring push, and they were obviously trying to substantially increase their ranks. And these officers came out of that push, and I can't remember exactly. I have the book right here someplace, I think, right in front of me, but I can't remember exactly. But he talked about the various field training officers for these four officers, and about how little time most of them had on. And his point is, I think, is pretty obvious. It's like, well, we'll never know how much these guys didn't learn because of the dearth of knowledge that their training officers were subject to. We're seeing a push right now. We're seeing a big influx of cadets going through. And in addition, or aside from, however you want to phrase it, to the mindset of the individual applicants, listen, no one's going to get me to say, oh, stop hiring people. No, you got enough cops. It's never going to happen. We're always going to want more cops out there. However, and Kevin, I'm going to use first on this. Do you think that there's a point at which we are putting too many people, too many new officers in the field at once versus the number of really tenured FTOs are available to train them?
I would, that's kind of a, for lack of a better term, a loaded question. Um, because
Yes, it is.
I think we're all aware of the position that the department was in up until recently, the highway patrol and law enforcement in general, of how everybody was running short staffed, and then that comes with loads of its own problems, right? Fatigue, because guys are getting held over for a double. You're having to work on your days off, because there's just not enough people to cover patrol shifts. And so what's the answer is, well, you've got to hire people. Well, to hire people, especially with attrition, you've got to hire and train and get officers out into the field that are working and trying to beat that attrition percentage to get your head back above water, if that makes sense, with personnel deployments. Of course, I think we kind of talked about it when, the three of us, when we were, off camera on our conversation, but it I recognized it in just the short time I was at the academy, because there was a short stint there where they were running 3 classes through the academy, and you just didn't
Mm-hmm.
have the
Mm-hmm.
time to personally invest in each cadet that you did when it was two. It was amazing how much difference that one, because now you're at some point during your curriculum, you're teaching across 3 classes, and you're like, I don't, you just don't have the time for the personal one-on-one experience that you did when it was just two. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and when I went to West LA, I got pegged to go to FTO school 11 months on the job.
Wow.
And that was after being extended on training for an additional
And I
time.
was too. I was
Yeah.
extended.
And I was one of the first guys out of the 7 of us out of my class that went to West LA that got picked to go to field training officer school. And I remember asking the sergeant, I'm like, you know, 7 months ago, I was fighting to keep my job, and now you're wanting me to train somebody? And the answer I was given, which was very eye-opening into a lot of people's perspective, was, well, I talked to the collision review officer, and your reports come through with very few mistakes. So because I could
Wow.
write a report and proofread, they sent me to FTO school. And I'm like, wow, that's what they're judging. You know what?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they're basing who they're sending to be FTOs. And it was just wild. And then I was an FTO until I ended up going to Willows in 2018. So for almost 20 years, I was a field training officer, and I loved it. I was a firm believer that you know, if you didn't do something to fix the problem that you were always complaining about as the guy sitting in the briefing room, then
Mm-hmm.
you don't have the right to complain. And as well as the experience, like you said, I thought that it was kind of a, you know, your responsibility to do that, to try to train people. Nobody's perfect, right? But to try to train people. So yeah, in a perfect world, you'd want all your FTOs to have 10 years on the job and worked a variety of incidents so that you get that well rounded. But you know, not to sound like I'm copping out, but I don't know what, well above my pay grade as to what the how you manage the problems that we are with hiring people and then getting people out into the field so that there are actually cops out on the beat.
Yeah, well, Kevin, don't feel bad about that because I threw the qualifier in there. Say I'm not going to be the guy to say, "Hey, stop hiring people." I'm with you on that one. I want personnel out there, but there everything has a trade off. So, Mark, what's your take on this phenomenon of really, for lack of a better phrase, trainees training trainees because of massive influx of officers, new officers.
Well, that's going to have to do a lot with the areas too. When you're sending people to training areas, that's gonna happen. I'll give you an example. I remember in the '80s, Hayward CHP office. The Hayward CHP office, like 90% of the office was on probation, which meant they had less than a year on the job, and
Wow.
the sergeants had just promoted, the lieutenants had just promoted, the captain had just promoted. So when you're in an office like that, and they were getting 16 recruits at one time, they were having to farm them out to different areas, and they'd go through FTO in a different area because they didn't have enough FTOs to go around, and they didn't have enough qualified people. And 16 was like a lower number. They were getting, back to back. So people, couldn't afford the area, and as soon as they do their year, they're out. So they were getting cadets on a regular basis. So you run into that issue where you have the FTOs are not very experienced when they start training people. Um, you get a cadet who has some serious issues, or a new officer, should I say, who has some serious issues, and unfortunately, the inexperienced officer doesn't know how to address these issues, how to work these issues out, and how to assist them to get them through. And what happens a lot of times is they make it through the cracks. They get let out in the field. So what we used to do, and just give you an idea, when I was there, as an officer and as a sergeant, what we would try to do is we would try to identify people that just were either in it for the wrong reasons,
Hmm.
or basically it just wasn't a career for them and stuff. And
Hmm.
we would work hard, to have them realize that this is probably not the job for me, and or if they're going to stick around, we would make sure that they're trained, and we would do everything we could to make sure they were trained properly. At one time, the Highway Patrol had the fame that we had the highest attrition rate at an academy level, and we had the lowest attrition rate at the FTO level. And
Hmm.
the reason for that, we strongly felt, was because we basically were able to get, you know, rid of people, for a lack of a better term, get rid of people that didn't need to be in this line of work, and we were able to, either because they couldn't drive, they couldn't shoot, they couldn't do their physical methods of arrest tactics or enforcement tactics. And so, they were physically unprepared, and we did all this, and we worked hard with the other units. And there was a new unit that came up to the academy when I went up there as a sergeant, and that was the Advanced Officer Safety Tactics Unit. Um, and we would work with them also, and they would work with us. And anyway, long story short is that the academy took care of a lot of issues,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
the field had had better quality of officers coming out at that time. And I'm not saying that the quality isn't the isn't great now, but I'm saying the quality isn't great now, just because from what I've heard from other people. So um, you know, but that's just the way administrations have to deal with it. A lack of people putting in. Also, I mean, like Kevin said, we're fighting against other departments. The Highway Patrol is fighting with all these departments, and I'm not just talking California. It's
That's
it,
right.
it's hilarious. You go to job fairs here in California, and Texas is here. Nevada's in here. Florida. They're all looking for people. So, and they'll be recruiting in California for their states. So, so
Yep.
it is, and a lot of it is because it's not the same to be an officer now as it was before. They used to love us a long time ago, believe it or not. Um,
Hmm.
but now, just because of society, and a lot of these groups that have come out, they've vilified law enforcement. And so a lot of people don't want to deal with that. They don't want to come to it, even though maybe it's something they would have loved to have done. They don't want to have to deal with that. So there's a lot of things that are in there. Like I said, I told you earlier, I said the list is long.
The list is long, and I said, you said you made a point earlier, and it's a good point to keep repeating because these are complex issues we're talking about, and I think we're all being fair here. Um, that there is no easy answer. There's no one solution to these challenges. On one hand, you have, my God, hey, we're down 500 officers, and if we run the academy full speed, it'll take us 4 years to replace those 500 officers through because of attrition, things like that. What else do you want us to do, Mark? Mark Garrett, I'm talking to myself here. This is exactly right. These are complex issues. There's a teeter to the totter, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's just important to acknowledge that there's always a price to be paid someplace, no matter what your strategy is in life, and just acknowledging this. In matter of fact, to that point, you know, Mark, and it's okay to talk about your son. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah, no worries.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he reported. He's a CHP officer. He reported to West LA, just like Kevin did
Mhm.
when he was a new officer. In fact, tell us about that. Tell us about his mindset and about work in the field and booking procedures. It was very interesting. We talked about the other day.
Yeah, my son came on, and I've said this 100 times. It would have broke my heart if my son would have gone through the academy, gone to the field, and become a slug. And
Hmm.
and for the audience that not familiar with that term, slug, that's a person who's like a slug, lazy. doesn't want to do anything. So my son, he graduated. He was assigned to West LA. He worked his butt off. He went through it. And I told him from the beginning, I go, just because it's an 8-hour shift doesn't mean that your shift is done after 8 hours. You have to put time in. You have to put your own time in. You have to work hard. Unfortunately, he took that a little too literally because he was staying, after hours. He would be at the office for 16 hours sometimes. He'd be in there on his days off, working on his days off, putting in that time, and really, putting a lot of time where he was to the point where he got fatigued because he didn't have any time off. But he worked really hard. He finally, he got off a break-in, and he continued to work and to hone his skills. He's gone to courses on search and seizure. He's gone to advanced officer safety tactics classes. He's been, he's been trying to get as much training as he can to, make himself a well-rounded, police officer in all aspects in investigations. So he's had that attitude, and it's hard for him because he has had to work with people who don't have that drive, who don't have that attitude, who will sit somewhere and wait till they get a call, type of thing. And so
Like firefighters.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's been hard for him in that respect. And finally, I told him, I go, hey, you can't control other people. You can only control yourself. So you have to basically do your job, do what you need to do, take care of business, and there's times where you're going to have to call those people out. If they're not pulling their weight, you're going to have to call them out, and that's part of being law enforcement too. Is telling people when they're doing something wrong that they're doing something wrong, and that doesn't just stop with the public. That also goes with other law enforcement officers.
I'll tell you right now, when the sergeant called you in to straighten you out, whatever it is, a counsel, whatever you want to call it, you then say, okay, this is the boss. He or she has to tell me, hey, Mark, you got to do this a little better, this different, or don't do that again. But you understand that they have to do that. That's what they signed up to do when they took the sergeant's test, or when I took it 3 times. But when you have a senior officer pull you into the clerical room after briefing on graveyards and start dropping F-bombs about work habit or tactics, whatever it is, that stuff you take to heart, because you're thinking, this person's just coming after me because they're looking out for me, looking out for the department, period. That's it. They don't have to do it. They don't get paid to do this. They don't have really any administrative authority over me, but they do have massive authority over me. And, I'll tell you right now, I had senior guys come to me and say, hey, Garrett, hey, let me talk to you about something. And there was nothing ever too bad, thank goodness. But man, did I take it to heart. I think it's so important about that, about straightening out your peers, straightening out peers.
Can I throw something in there on that?
Oh yeah, Kevin, go ahead, please.
So this is probably going to be unpopular for a lot of people. But
bring it then.
To that exact point, um, I better just start protecting myself from the daggers now. But I think that the implementation of the 12-hour shift really put a kink in the informal mentoring that you got, because it literally put 2 sides of the week into an area. You could be working graveyards and all of the experience had the weekends off. And so the other side of the week, the other guys working, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, who have been on the job a year and a half, they're not responding to incidents or working at scenes with you know people that are senior to them. So I think that really hurt the informal mentorship and the learning curve for the new officers, because what they didn't learn on field training, you would pick up just working
Through
incidents with
osmosis, being a beat
yes.
partner to a guy who's been on for 20 years.
Yes. And so I know that, again, it's one of those things that, the schedule and hiring people and quality of life and everything is important, but the 12-hour shift, I saw it, right? You had guys that, they were top car working graveyards with a year on the job because that was their side of the week, and so you just didn't have that mentorship from the senior officers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kevin, don't worry about the daggers, because they'll probably half of them will come at me. And I'll tell you why. And by the way, you can talk to some of your former fellow area reps that you and I both know. I won't mention their names, but I'm really good friends with. This goes back to before you were on the job, the 12-hour shift proposal stuff. So I'm talking about, you talk about a new officer. I've got 2 or 3 or 5 years in the job. And these people are talking about, oh, we got to go 12-hour shifts. And at that point, I thought, if you want to wreck our effectiveness as a department and our efficiency as officers, go to 12-hour shifts. We are not LAPD. We are not certain, certain local police forces, which 12-hour shifts work very well under certain circumstances. They will not work well for the highway patrol. Mark, this goes back to your point about these guys sitting around waiting for calls. This is exactly what happened on the 12-hour shifts. You know why? Because this little thing here, your noggin cannot be on the, pardon the phrase here, the terminology. This is just cop talk. The hunt and kill mode for 12 hours. It can't work like that. And that's what we as CHP officers are expected to do, to go out and look for the out of place thing, the speeder, the drunk driver, the tailgate, whatever it is. Look for that, make an enforcement contact, take the appropriate enforcement action, move on to the next thing that we identify. Other law enforcement agencies respond to calls. Look, my best friend's LAPD officer, and he's actually in Metro now. He's been on the show many times. But for those guys and gals in LAPD, I'm not just picking on, I love LAPD, by the way, wherever it is. For those people who are on patrol in those agencies, they do but their primary role up there is to respond to calls. Highway patrol, you are expected to look for the violation and take the appropriate enforcement contact. That's why we have the monthly evaluation called the 100 form. What did you do all month? Well, Sergeant, I didn't get a call, so I just sat here at the office. Well, we would know what happened to you. I said from the beginning, the 12-hour shifts will not work, and they didn't. What happened? Productivity dropped. You went from 8 hours to 12 hours, and you didn't see an increase in activity enforcement contacts because you just cannot work that long. So, and there's all kinds of aspects. To your point, Mark, the list is long, and that, I'm talking just about the 12-hour shifts aspect I was opposed to. And now what's happened? They finally dumped the 12-hour shifts. Are going back to 8s, some 10s, I think. And Kevin, you're probably more up on than I am, but I think they've pretty much gotten rid of the 12-hour shifts for the most part.
Well, some areas
No, I
are,
see a shaking your head. No, Mark? Well, Kevin, go ahead, and Mark, I'll have you finish up on that one. Go ahead.
yeah, the 12-hour shifts are back, and a lot of areas are going to them. To be
So, but
fair
they
to the
did
12
go
hours,
away. Did they not go away for a
yeah,
while?
for a while they
They
did,
did.
and they're back.
Okay.
Um, to be fair to the 12-hour shift with the high patrol, uh, and kind of to what you were getting at, Chief, is that the high patrol in a metropolitan area, in my limited opinion, is it's very hard to make a 12-hour shift work when you're a commute based agency.
Mm-hmm.
But it does, to be fair to the 12-hour shift, like I was starting to say, it does work well at, CHP areas that don't really have a commute, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a 2 or 3 hour window on either side of a 12-hour shift where you're just responding from call to call to call, because that's when the traffic is out there. So it can work in areas. And then I think if you have enough people to run adequate shifts, it can work. But most CHP areas just didn't have the personnel to properly implement a 12-hour shift for their area. But
Yeah, I think those are valid points. Mark, you were going to make a point as well.
Just that, it goes back to the whole thing. We're competing against other law enforcement agencies, regardless of what
Right.
the work is. We're competing against other
Mm-hmm.
law enforcement agencies, and if you can do something that will entice people to come to your agency, you're going to have to do it. And I'm on the side of that. I understand the part about, as far as like the older officers being on the other side of the week, on the day shift portion of it and everything like that. But at the same time, I think it goes also to the supervisors, your first line supervisors. They're mentors too. They have to
Right.
assume that responsibility, and unfortunately, a lot don't assume that responsibility. Unfortunately, you know, uh, just the highway patrol is no different than any other department. We promote people that aren't ready to be promoted sometimes, and so
By the way, many people will say that I'm an example, but go ahead.
so I was a slow learner. It took me 19 years before I promoted to a sergeant, but I love being an officer. I loved all the aspects of being an officer. So to me, there was a lot there. So, but at the same time, supervisors they have to do their job. They have to monitor. They have to listen to that radio, and unfortunately, a lot of times they don't. So the problem is we're on 12-hour shifts. A lot of these areas. The problem is that there isn't that mentor beat officer anymore. So we have to adapt to that. Law enforcement has to adapt to it, and basically, by when you adapt to it, is your first line supervisors. They have to be out there. They have to be, working with those officers, and they have to be ready to have that uncomfortable conversation to call them in and tell them, hey, you're sitting at this parking lot all night or all day. You're not listening to your calls. You're not responding. Other people are having to pull your weight. So things like that. But yeah, the 12-hour shifts are definitely, they can be fatiguing. If you're on a graveyard portion of it, six in the evening till 6 in the morning, and then you have court during the day. I mean, I can't
That's right.
imagine how that would work. But nevertheless,
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
is what it is. The Highway Patrol had to do that. The officers wanted it. It went through the union. The majority of officers voted it that they wanted that, and they got a great commissioner right now that listens to the field.
He does.
And he does, and that's what the field wanted, and that's what they did. So now you just have to be able to figure the rest of it out. Like I said, it's going to be my supervisors.
Yeah, on
I
this
think
one,
you brought
I
up.
think. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sorry. No, both of you guys haven't been there, and especially is starting with the department well before I did. I even saw it, and I don't know really what made it change, but Sarge, to your point, you know, coming on the job when cell phones were just brand new, and you would hear, "Hey, 1019 and CS1," which means return to the office because the sergeant wants to talk to you. It could be a long drive depending upon where you were, wondering what you did wrong. The sergeants, there was a respect and a fear of the sergeant's office, and I think
Mhm.
um, uh, that's not in place anymore. The high patrol I grew up in, and I'm sure similar for you guys, was the sergeants ran the office. If a captain or a lieutenant had to get involved, there was a problem. The sergeants were the ones that controlled that station, and it's just I think that's been lost. And I don't, having never promoted, I can't answer to why or when or what the solution is. But I would agree 100% that you know the sergeants being a mentor is definitely a necessity,
Well,
especially on areas with 12-hour
you
shifts.
yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that there probably is a little bit divergence here with the three of us. It's probably especially with me. For the reasons I articulated. In other words, patrol car availability, patrol car assignments. There were a number of reasons that I didn't feel it would be a good fit. But you guys are saying that it's coming back. Listen, I hope it works. Mark, to your point about competing with these other agencies, I did recruitment as an officer for 2 years, and then I was the PIO and recruitment sergeant for Southern Division for 4 years. So I was in that world of competing with Texas. The first agency or first state you said was Texas, and boy, they were always in our backyard trying to get our would be applicants. So there's no doubt there certainly was a tangible need to find a way to compete with these other agencies as far as getting qualified applicants. So I totally agree with that. I just don't think it's the best fit for the Highway Patrol in general. There may be specific areas, Kevin, that you said. Maybe, by the way, and maybe they've had hindsight now. They've had time to work out some of the nuts and bolts and fix things and make them better. And if it works, it works. I certainly hope that the rank and file are happy, productive, safe, efficient, effective, and that it's good for the Highway Patrol in general. So we'll just go ahead and see how that works out over the years, and more power to those guys and gals in those 12-hour shifts. Not for the kid.
Well,
But
one of the
you go ahead.
it's my understanding too that and I may be wrong on this, but I think the areas can determine whether or not they want the 12-hour shifts. It's
Right.
not mandatory that they do.
No, correct. That part
Good.
I was a part of all that with the association, and how that evolved over the years. How it would go area by area, then it would come to division and things like this. So that process probably still seems to be the same. And again, if a captain and an assistant chief, can work out the logistics and make it work for that area, and everyone's happy, and they're doing the job that they're supposed to do, then I'm all for it. I don't have any problem with it just because it's got a 12 in front of the shift. My problem was it's taking away from the mission of the patrol ultimately. But again, if I'm wrong there and they fix those issues and made it better, then I mean it, more power to them. And we want to hire as many good people as we can. If 12 hours is part of it, then so be it. I want to, as we kind of slide near the end of the conversation, which is fantastic. There's so many things here. And actually, you know what? I'm making notes because you guys spark so many thoughts. This is kind of sensitive, actually, especially for you and me, Mark, because I'm going to talk about somebody that you and I knew very, very well. It's a little bit hard to talk about, but Erin Greenfield and women on the job. By the way, I've had two friends of mine. Wendy Hahn is a retired CHP officer. She's a 9,000 ID. She and I worked together when I was inside division as an officer. And Jonna Wilshire, a friend of mine who's a retired LA County deputy sheriff. And we talked about women on the patrol because this is obviously it's not only what would you say? It's not only an operational, discussion, but it's certainly a political, obviously, discussion about equality and accessibility and upward mobility, all these things. When I was talking to Wendy and Jonna, the funny thing is, and by the way, and they're both senior to me, and I think maybe even senior to you, Mark. Wendy, what you're a 10,000 ID, right? Yeah, we lost your audio, Mark. Just you may have muted yourself there.
Sorry. Yeah, correct.
Yep, there. So yeah, Wendy's 9,000. But Wendy made the point. I want to talk about Erin because she and I were good friends, and I know that you had the highest respect and regard for her. When Wendy came on, I think in I want to say 80, something like that, 81, whatever it was. That she said the funny thing is, Mark, there were jerks. In other words, there were a lot of guys who were jerks. She said, but it just wasn't talked about. In other words, I came on the job, and this goes back to mindset and why you wanted to. I came on, she goes, because I wanted to be a California Highway Patrol officer. And Wendy worked the road for a long time before she came into the field, a long time. And she was involved in a lot of stuff. And the same thing for Jonna with the sheriff's department. She was actually a county marshal first and then got absorbed by the sheriff's department. But the point is, and they didn't know each other when I brought them on the show. They hadn't met. And it turns out they have the same mindset. And by the way, and Jonna is Wendy's contemporary. They came on up at the same time, their respective agencies. And they talked about, I came on to do a job. Yeah, I encountered jerks. Not a lot, but there were some out there that, guys that say stuff and they would do stuff. And I would tell them exactly where to go. And she's talking about fellow officers. I tell them exactly where to choose. Mark, I never had to go to a sergeant about anybody. Because I told them, if you do that again, then I'm going to kick you in the nuts. Period. And I got all the respect that I ever wanted. And it reminded me of Erin because Erin was my classmate. And Erin and I actually met a couple of years before we went to the academy. We actually waited tables together in Pasadena. And she was friends with somebody in the department, and I was friends with somebody else in the department. And I think she had applied for Pasadena Police Department. I said, "Oh, Erin, hey, put an application in for the Highway Patrol like I did." She put her application in almost a year after I did, and she got invited to the academy before I did. But it turns out that we ended up going to the academy together. I made a phone call. I said, "Sir, a friend of mine who I recommended. Oh, what? Let me find her file. Hey, you'll be coming with her." Anyway, so we became academy classmates. really unusual that we'd worked together before, and then we went there together. But Erin was so adamant about being treated the same as anybody else, period. And what she hated more than anything else as a woman was any female in her class or anybody in the department, as you move forward in her career, any woman making an excuse about why she couldn't do whatever or why she's going to go inside, or the women who would go administratively right away. She had the worst taste in her mouth about that, and you almost couldn't talk to her bad mouthing some woman in the department, because she thought, this does me or any other woman who wants to be a cop no good. It does us no good whatsoever. And by the way, like you said, Mark, there are plenty of slugs, male or female, who try to hide in a closet right away, go right in. So this is not about women specifically. However, the perception is that women come on and they do this and they want to get off the field, blah, blah, blah. And Erin did not want to do that. And she was worse about this than any guy I know. She wanted women to stay in the field for as long as absolutely possible. And she did for a long time. And then later on, what does she become? She becomes a PT instructor. And she was, based on reputation, people I knew, she was one of the most feared PD instructors, certainly in my time in the Highway Patrol, because I'd hear about her all the time. And I'm going to go to you first, Mark, because you and I knew her very well. We lost Erin to cancer not too long ago. God rest her soul. But I want to talk to you about your experience with her and kind of, in other words, your impression about her sense of responsibility to be a representative for women, a good representative for women on the department.
Well, Erin was an excellent representative. She went like you said, she was out of your class, out of 5 of 90. And I just remember she came in. She was in great physical shape when she came in. She was prepared. She worked hard in all aspects of academy training. Physical training, she thrived on the physical training portion of it. Physical methods of arrest, she thrived on physical methods of arrest. She was an excellent example for all officers, not just females, for all officers, because of her work ethic. She had an incredible work ethic. Erin and I stayed friends from the time she graduated till her passing. We still every once in a while would be in contact. So, but during that whole time, Erin was just that person. That she was a great example. She was a PT instructor. She would call me for advice. We talked a lot, and we we shared a lot of things in common. For our love for the job, physical methods of arrest, physical training. We
Well, you guys are both badass runners.
we used to like to run.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin knows all about that. He's a runner too. But we just had that we had a lot in common. We probably grew a little closer together after Officer Clearman's death, because she was very good friends with him, and which is something that hit her really, really hard. But she trained him, and she always questioned herself. One time she told me, she goes, "Is there something I could have done better that maybe could have prevented this? Is there something?" And like I told her, I said, "You know what? I said, this is a profession that we all choose. This is something that we choose because we want to do it, and we know the risks. And sometimes, unfortunately, it ends in the death of a law enforcement officer. But at the same time, it's something that we chose to do. So, like I said, she took that. It was funny because when I spoke to her after that, she took it to heart, and she understood what I was saying to her. And that was Erin. She'd listen. She was just a great person, but she was a great role model. And like I said, for women on the department as well as males, which is a lot to say at that point.
Mark, I'm so glad you said that, because I didn't. That she was a great role model, period. She's the kind of officer, she's the kind of person that every person should want as a partner out there in graveyards, or backing you up if you're a solo unit, because she was no BS. She was incredibly physically fit. She used to take me on runs around the Rose Bowl, and I have to go to the hospital afterwards when she and I worked together. Um, but she did that she wanted to be the best that she could. Um, so, and I bring that up because it's so important, and this is going to blend into, as we wind things down here about the department. There's something, Kevin, that you and I discussed yesterday that we're going to transition into. But I don't know if you have a take on that, on that, Kevin. Obviously, certainly, your wife being in the department for all these years, and what a great role model she was. And again, she and I had a chance to work together, but we never worked together in the field. And so I wonder. Not to divulge any personal conversations you have with her, but I wonder if that does come up in general about the perception of women and really being a role model. And I know that she was a great one.
It's funny because obviously, you know, throw the disclaimer out there. I'm biased. Um, you know, my wife
You better
was,
be.
yeah, my wife was a highway patrolman, and and you know, and kind of the way I always looked at it is, were you at West Valley, Chief, when Sarita Salas was there?
Oh yes, I was
Yeah,
at Sarita's funeral, but yeah, I was
yeah,
there
I
when she
was
was
too.
there. Yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
rest her soul. Not to
Yep.
bring up another friend that's
Yeah,
passed, but I can remember
she
being
was a
in
great
fights
example.
with Sarita, and I remember one in particular where my partner and I are wrestling a guy, and Sarita and her partner show up, and she's in there just wrenching on that guy, and she's whispering in his ear, "Hey, do you like that? Do you like that?" And we're trying to get this guy into custody, and I'm laughing. I'm literally laughing with this guy, and
Hmm.
because of what she's saying. And to this day, and this is not an exaggeration, with all of the people I worked with, she would be in the top 5 or 6 that I would want responding if I were putting out a help call, because I knew that she
Kevin, I'm
was going
gonna.
to get there. She was going to get there
Yeah,
and do it, and she was going to wear out horses to get to me. So anyway,
this
just
is so true. Go ahead.
I would, as far as April, I used her as an example with every cadet class I taught, because I think if we're honest, and as a whole, there are physical limitations between men and women. That doesn't mean that you've got women that are more physically capable than some men and vice versa, but is just a baseline. And I don't mean that in a negative way.
Hmm.
But with female officers, I would use April as an example because she told me a story about when she was on break-in working graveyards, and she's trying to balance a drunk out, and the drunk, you know, starts clenching his fists, and like, and she just looks at this guy and says, "Hey, I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not going to fight you. I'm just going to shoot you."
Good.
And
Hmm.
10-15 with one, they take him into custody. And so I would tell my cadet classes that, there might be a time when somebody is going to be able to, justify a higher level of force, but having the mindset of just being that person, like, hey, this, I'm going to take care of business and get it done, whatever it is. You know, I would instill that in my cadets, and especially trying to reach out to the female cadets, like, hey, don't, to what you guys are talking about, don't be that person that thinks because you're a woman that you can't, be as good as a highway patrolman as somebody else. So
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned right when you said Sarita, man, it's like, oh my God, there's another. And by the way, a number of women that I worked with were fantastic. Sarita, the thing about Sarita, and Mark, I'm sure you didn't know her, but Sarita was tiny. I mean, what was she, a buck five soaking wet, uh,
but
Kevin? I
but
mean,
but
but
but just straight muscle.
oh,
She was
that was my
fit.
point.
Yeah.
She was like an anvil,
Yeah.
and the thing is, she had the mindset. Matter of fact, sometimes I was kind of surprised that Sarita got on the job because she had the mindset of she's going from 0 to 10 on you if you don't comply. Now again, I was her supervisor for long. There was no use of force issue. I don't think I there was nothing but positive comments on her monthly evaluations. I mean, she was a fantastic officer, but you
Yes.
knew Sarita would go to the mat with Shaquille O'Neal. Now, by the way, with Shaquille O'Neal, she would have been killed. Minus firearms. He's like, but she would have died with one of her fingers going through his eyeball into his brain. She would have not given up until the last breath was gone. That was Sarita. And violators, suspects, a-holes knew that when she dealt with them. She wasn't boastful. She was just the real deal, and she was a great example for. And by the way, was she fun? She was
Oh, she
funny.
was.
She was irreverent. And the thing is, just like Erin Greenfield and Mark, this is for the audience, for you too. See, the thing is, Erin Greenfield and Wendy Hahn and Jonna Wilshire, this is the important thing to take away about this. And this goes to this whole thing about the evolution of law enforcement and the evolution of the perception of law enforcement from the outside looking in. This is so important, no matter what group, quote unquote, you're in. Those ladies I just talked about, Sarita and Wendy and Jonna and Erin, when it came to law enforcement, they didn't see themselves as women first. They saw themselves as cops first when they were on the job. That's how they saw themselves. And as you see yourself, people tend to see you. This is the thing. And that's what they did. They saw themselves as fellow police officers. And then what sparked that in my mind is, like, in briefing, you talk about being one of the guys. You talk about being one. Oh my God, Sarita was just. I mean, she was as irreverent. It's like, hey, Sarita, Mark. You guys know me, Mark Garrett. Thinking, hey, don't use that kind of language. Lieutenant may be coming in graveyard shift to say hi. So, but she was a lot of fun. God rest her soul, and she was great. Now, to that on that subject, there was one thing we talked about, or kind of, it's ancillary, about politics and about these influences. Kevin, we talked about this. We're talking about Marlene Pennick, and this is really important to me. And Mark, I know you weren't involved in this. I don't think you were aware of it until we talked about it yesterday. But Marlene Pennick she was a homeless person, mental, emotional issues, multiple time arrestee, whether for criminal acts or for 5150 for being taken into custody to protect herself from herself because of these issues. But I forget what year it was now, Kevin. 2000, what? I forget. 11,
It
6,
wasn't. Yeah, 14 maybe.
maybe 14, give or take, but about a decade ago. So Marlene Pennick is a person who wanders up on to the 10 freeway. And folks, just stay with me because this is talking about the evolution of law enforcement. She wanders up on the 10 freeway, really not too far from USC, just west of downtown Los Angeles by a couple of miles. Long story short, she is encountered, lots of calls coming out, 911 calls coming out. CHP officer respond, a pretty new officer. His name was Dan Andrew. Is that correct, Kevin?
I'm not sure of his name to be the
Yeah,
correct,
believes
whether it's
Andrew's
Andrews
last
or
name.
Andrew.
But yeah, the point is, he responds and he gets into a physical altercation with this person. Uh, fast forward after all this, she's taken into custody. But fast forward beyond that, there's an outcry from the Black community in Los Angeles, California in general, maybe around the country. It was national news. And my understanding is, and again, I haven't asked the former commissioner myself, but my understanding is that there was some communication from the governor's office that someone has to leave the department. You, commissioner, or that officer. And it comes on pretty good, solid source. And again, I still talk to the former commissioner and things like that, and not try and put him in a bad spot. But when you were an area rep, you were, for the audience, a union representative for the officers, and you had some involvement in this, talking to the other reps. Is that right, Kevin, or am I speaking out of turn?
No, if I could just give a little bit of kind of a background to the conversation that we
Please
were
do.
having
Yeah.
before. So,
Mm-hmm.
this was really a hard incident for me, and I wasn't involved in the incident. I didn't work Central Los Angeles. I know people who had personal contact with the officer, and we, most of us saw the video, or at least what was, being put on the news. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I can remember sitting in classrooms in the academy, and a particular instructor's, can't remember his name, saved my life, but being told, I can see his face telling us, the highway patrol is a family, and as long as you do what's right, the highway patrol will always back you. And I took that to heart, and never really never really had anything. I mean, obviously you always get that, you're always going to have somebody, oh, the department's doing me dirty or whatever, but for the most part, right, the department, in my opinion, normally did the right thing. But no names, but the commissioner at the time,
Hmm.
you know, the A roll wasn't even dry on this video yet, and he's coming out saying it's the worst thing he's seen in his years in law enforcement. And when it was all said and done and the dirt settled, everybody said the kid did the right thing, from my understanding.
Hmm.
And but it was, everybody knew right away, especially within the department, that this was a political hot potato. And I hadn't heard what you just said, but even just a beat cop at the time working in LA, you knew that this was, he was coming out trying to get in front of, you know, another potentially riotous situation in Los Angeles. And somebody was being a scapegoat, in my opinion. And and Sarge, I'm sure we all can agree, uh, if you watch the video and you pay attention, she's just not laying there being compliant. She's fighting back. And for those of us that have been in force incidents, it's not like TV. It's not pretty. It's ugly. And when you're fighting another human being, it's very difficult for one human being to control four limbs on another human being that doesn't want to be controlled. And so when the commissioner at the time came out and said this, I just like, oh my gosh. And then you fast forward to where so much of my information or involvement, for lack of a better term, was at subsequent, union meetings, association meetings. It's not truly a union, but most people
Hmm.
would, you would recognize it as a union.
And
Um,
that's why I said union. Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
But and basically from the association and from upper management within the department, we were finally told, stop talking about it, stop asking. We're not get, you're not getting any more info than you've. And that was difficult for me as an officer and as a representative that would go in with guys that were involved in critical incidents. you know Now it brings hesitation, in my opinion, right? Like, I was always told that if I did something, as long as I did what was right, the department would back me. And again, not knowing all of the particulars, but having a decent idea, and then having talked to people, he did it right. And that was a political calculation on the department side of it, to kind of, prevent another riot, in my opinion. I'm sure you have, info on it as well.
Well, you know what? We've been going for an hour and a half, and if I give you my opinion on it, we'll go for another hour and a half. So I won't do that, at least not in full. But Mark, I don't know if you and I didn't send you any videotape of the Marlene Pennick incident. But and by the way, just a little background. This person wandered up onto the freeway via an off ramp, walked up onto a freeway. Now she's in the gore point of the number 4 lane and an on ramp. And this officer, in my opinion, here's my opinion, he actually saved her life because she was attempting to roll over into the number 4 lane, and he's struggling to keep her from doing it. But if you've seen any video of it, Mark, you can talk about it. But to Kevin's point, and to what I'm getting at here about, we all love the Highway Patrol. We love the Highway Patrol. It's taking care of us, taking care of our families. This is not a bash of CHP. This is, at some point, does politics become so powerful that even otherwise good leaders succumb and do things they wouldn't or shouldn't do to either save themselves or, in their mind, save the reputation of an agency? And I just want to get your take on this, Mark.
Well, I've seen the video. I saw it when it first came out, and I've gone back and I saw it after that. I always used to, that's one of my hobbies. I testified a number of times as a use of force expert in federal court. So it was one of my hobbies to look at use of force and see, was it excessive and things along those lines. like anything else, I think this case you have to look at the totality of the situation. The the lady involved in this was, you know, she at the time she was 5150. She wasn't all there. She wasn't probably taking her medication. Like, we came across so many people like that in the field. When I worked out of Oakland, it is just unbelievable how many people, you know, that are Oakland are having mental issues, you know, from that area. I'd come across them all the time, and some of them got physical. And one of the things that, you know, we used to, you know, say this, you know, crazy don't feel pain, and it was, and it's true. You know, some of these people we were fighting on the side of the road, you know, they didn't feel any of the pain. I mean, we'd have them in control holds, and you know, and you know, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to snap something, and this person is still not feeling any pain. And so, and and a lot of times they were under the influence of drugs or whatever they may be, but nevertheless, you know, you have to look at the totality of the situations. When you look at it, when you break it down, how many of his strikes actually made contact? I mean, he threw a lot of strikes, but how many made contact? I mean, to me, and not to say anything bad about the officer, but it almost looked like he was shadowboxing a few times because he was coming up short quite a bit. You know, it was a highly stressful situation. He's on the side of the road. You got traffic whizzing by. You got all this stuff. You're trying to control this person. This person is not being compliant. This person, whatever, you know, you can spin it any which way you want to. This person was not being compliant at the time. So, you know, there's a lot of things going on there. Did this person deserve to lose their job? I mean, my opinion, you know, and that's just my opinion, I would say no. You know, so it was a bad situation, and it did have a bad look to it when you know, to someone who's untrained, and you show them this, they're thinking, oh man, this is horrible. But once you educate people on what actually is going on, you know, it was just a bad situation, you know, and there was a lot of components to this that made it a bad situation.
Well, listen, I couldn't agree with both of you more, and I think this is should he have lost his job. And by the way, he resigned in lieu of, and this was obviously pressure to do so, so he wouldn't have to say he was fired. But yeah, he did resign, or he was going to get fired. Um, but of course, this is like scratching the the itch or the scab. To me, it just makes things worse. And I'm talking in this case specifically race relations, because this is a case where this officer did. I was going to get into the PMA and the AOST ST stuff, but I'm not, just for time's sake. But that specific aspect, and you guys both touched on it. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything out of policy in our respective views. I agree with you, but it did not look good. And instead of leadership standing up and say, listen, as bad as this may look to the average person, this officer did what he's trained to do. And this officer probably saved this woman's life because she has a history. By the way, later on, she came up in the same area, the same freeway. Not too long later, another CHP officer had to grab her and take her off the freeway. So CHP officers have probably saved her life twice, but one of them lost his job over it. That's the irony. So, final thing I want to touch on, and this is very related. The reason I wanted to talk about this, the Marlene Pennick incident, is because talk about evolution. We fast forward now, 10 plus years later, and there are a couple of recent incidents that involve, and I say quote unquote, law enforcement leadership and media integrity. And this goes all the way back to, I mean, you can go back to any incident you want to, whether it's Rodney King or whether it's Marlene Pennick or whether it's any number, I'm forgetting so many names now, but any number of incidents where things look one way but they're not reality, or they're certainly not as bad as they look, and things like this. And then just plain old media bias, where people say what they want to believe, even if the facts, the evidence don't suggest that. So, Anthony, if you can cue up here, and I'll talk about it real quick. You can just cue it up and have it paused. Cut one. So about a week ago now, we had this brawl in. Actually, that's the wrong one. Clip one, Anthony, Cincinnati. And I'll wait for you to get that. But we had this brawl in Cincinnati, and I'm sure most of you have seen it. that are listening, watching, this was, at the end of the day, this was an attack by a group of young Black people on a couple or a few older, I say older than the young people, white people. And the reason I phrase it that way is because if the roles were reversed, if we had 10 or a dozen or 15 white people attacking one or two or three Black people, this would be non-stop roll on almost every network and certainly the internet. But it's not being phrased as a racial attack because, in my opinion, it doesn't fit the narrative. There's more to it than just the media bias, of course. There is the law enforcement, again, quote unquote, leadership involved here. Now, for those of you who've seen it, I just want to go ahead to, for time's sake, we do know at the very, very beginning of this, you have this one white guy and a Black guy that are confronting one another. It's a verbal altercation, and eventually it looks like in the video that this white guy reaches over and taps, you can call it a slap, on this Black guy, and then off we go. The reality is, not the reality is, but in a normal time, you'd have two guys now end up in a fight. But what happens is this devolves into now really a gang group mentality where all of these people, these young Black people, now attack this one white guy. So, Anthony, go ahead and play that first clip of Cincinnati. Stop it right there. So this woman here, who was part of one of these few people who was out that night, this is 3 o'clock in the morning, probably, I'm guessing everyone's been drinking, which is obviously a problem. Nothing happens good after midnight, especially when you're drunk. But this woman here was not involved in the original altercation. She's simply attempting to stop the first guy from being beaten to death. And we see the punch that was thrown, and we see the injuries now that resulted with this woman here. Clear cut. Now, again, I may have seen this, so I'm going to keep this short. Anthony, I want you to go to clip 2, I think. I may have gotten the clips wrong here, but yeah. This is a councilwoman, if I remember correctly. Go ahead and play that, Anthony. This is a councilwoman, and look what she tweets here. They begged for that beatdown. I'm grateful for the whole story. This is a Cincinnati councilwoman, Victoria Parks. So you can stop right there. That'll be enough on that one. Mark, Kevin, my point about this, and we're not even showing the police chief. I'll talk about her as well. But here you have people in supposed leadership positions, and they can't call it for what it is. These are two idiots who got into this altercation. Again, probably both drunk. Maybe they're both sober, but they're fighting. But what happens is this results in a group of people who happen to be all Black now attacking someone of another race. And then you have a councilwoman who's glad about it and that they deserve the beat down. She loves the whole story. City council people, women, men, or check the other box, whatever they are, have an effect, have influence on law enforcement, especially if those so-called leaders are weak. We're not going to play the tape, but this police chief, she talks about, we don't know the whole story, social media, it's all over the place, distorting it, blah, 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 instead of calling it out for what it is. Again, if this had been a white on Black assault and battery and gang mentality, we would be hearing about the rebirth of a Ku Klux Klan, and all Blacks are being lynched if they go out after 11 o'clock at night in Cincinnati, and so forth and so on. And we're not hearing it here. Now, I'm hot about this, and as you can tell, because I'm wondering at what point will people say what needs to be said. You can pretty much only get this commentary on podcast or maybe on one or two well-known cable networks, but not on CNN, not on MSNBC, not on CBS, not on ABC. I'm asking both of you, how much do you think the media, and I'm going to use the word, these woke leaders are having, how much effect are they having on the ability for men and women in law enforcement to their job? And Kevin, I'm going to go to you first on this.
Uh, I don't even think it's a question. Um, you look at what just recently happened in in Los Angeles, and instead of coming out and condemning, you've got boulders, and it hits home to all of us, right? You've got boulders being thrown from overcrossings on patrol cars that were out of West Valley's area, and
Mm-hmm.
and leadership in the city, because of federal actions that ICE is doing, whether you like it or not, and and just protesting appropriately, they go out and it becomes a riot, and the politicians at the local level are basically condoning it or severely trying to downplay it. Oh, it wasn't that violent. Well, the video don't lie, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You've got, you know, highway patrolmen taking cover under an overcrossing because people are throwing boulders from 30 or 40 feet in the air. Uh, uh, and I and they're getting a pass and basically being told that that's okay, and you have a right to be mad, and some of them even was going as far as to say, yeah, go up, rise up to, that's the way we're going to get this stopped. And I just don't understand it. As far as its impact on law enforcement, it just makes it like it's almost an impossible task. Like, how am I supposed to do my job when the leadership is, you know telling the other side or giving them permission to violate the law, but then I'm supposed to enforce it? I just don't. It's beyond me. If you can't tell, I just don't understand it.
Well, it's beyond me too. And Mark, I'm going to give you the last word on this, and this is pretty much the last word of the podcast, except for a couple of thank yous. But I'm going to show one more clip, and again, keep in mind the Cincinnati clip. We're going to show one more clip here before we wind down. Anthony, can you cue up cut 3 and have it ready to go? Now, this is the New York shooter from just about I don't know, about 5 days ago from today's recording. This is CNN. I know many of you have seen this, but I'm going to play it again. Anthony, go ahead and play it.
Join you here to John's reporting that they do know what he looks like. Male, possibly white, mustache, sunglasses, in that building, isolated to, they believe, to various locations, including upper floors, is where they're focused.
Anthony, pause it right there. So you see the verbiage down there. You see Erin Burnett, who is a disgrace. I'm sorry. She's just a disgrace. Because just set the background for those of you who don't know, who don't write CNN or whatever. They had already shown this suspect's image a number of times. And she repeats this a couple of times during her coverage, that the suspect is possibly white. I don't know if any of you have seen the Babylon Bee meme they did right after this, of course. Babylon Bee is hilarious. They had a meme of O.J. Simpson in the 405 in 1994. And the caption is a white male in a white Bronco, whatever, we're chasing. And my wife sent that to me. And I said, this guy is darker than OJ. And they do this. In other words, Mark, if we have outlets like CNN, or you name any number of them, these entities are not an island unto themselves. They deal with, obviously politicians and lobbyists, these outlets. I think that we have to realize that if you have an anchor calling that guy possibly white, there have to be people in positions of authority, again, I put that in quote, who are bending their knee to political correctness. Now, again, I'm hoping the wave is changing a little bit. I'm hoping it is. But I'm coming out of George Floyd. I did my last year in Southern Division as a chief with George Floyd, and I saw the shenanigans that happened there. I saw Mike Moore, who I'm buddies with, LAPD chief, kneeling to Black Lives Matter on the steps of City Hall. I mean, what in the hell is happening? If it is getting better, it's not fixed yet. We still have a long way to go. Sir, I'm giving you the last word.
Well, I agree with what Kevin says and what you've been saying. the media now has lost their minds. Politicians in certain states have lost their mind. It doesn't make any sense. This world is upside down at this point. What was right is now wrong. What is wrong is now right. It's hard, and I can't imagine being in law enforcement now today. I mean, I just can't imagine what it must be like. My son, I tried to steer him away from going into law enforcement, to tell you the truth, just because, from what I saw, what was going on. At least not if he told me he wanted to go be a police officer in Florida, I probably would have said okay. But just seeing what's here, what's going on, and how things are based on politics. That is just crazy. Like you said, that in that first clip in Cincinnati, had that been a a black man and a black lady, and white people had done the same thing to them, I mean, there would have been an uproar, and people would have been really upset on the media side. I think people are upset. You know, we have to give credit to the American public. I think people are upset by what they saw, but they're being fed, this information through some of these outlets, and I think, bottom line is they see it. I mean, they no, it doesn't matter what, they still see it. Had that lady, when she got hit, okay, there was no reason to hit her. She wasn't doing anything. She wasn't doing anything. And let's just say the man did something like push the guy and stuff. Okay, and he got clocked. For whatever reason. The guy thought, hey man, I thought he was coming at me, whatever. And but what happened after that? Subsequently, what happened to that? That was just unbelievable. And for somebody to be in a position of power, a position of a council lady, to say they deserve that beatdown. Okay, that same person would then have to say, oh, well, and Rodney King deserved that beatdown because he ran from police. He initially came at the police officers. He wasn't being compliant to their orders. That person would have to see that then as being justified, exactly. So it's hard. Like I said, all this what we're talking about today, most of the things, it is what's making law enforcement so tough, and it's making it undesirable for a lot of people not to go in law enforcement. A lot of good people we should have in law enforcement, we don't have them because they don't want to deal with it. Is what it comes down to.
Well, I believe you're right, and I said I hope the tide is turning. I really do. Um, you always say, well, it can't get any worse than you see something like this. But again, hoping the tide is turning, and I tell you right now, you guys, I keep making notes as you guys are talking. I said, well, I'm going to keep these guys here until tomorrow if I'm not careful. I'm going to cut this off for your sake because it's been absolute pleasure, not only from the podcast point of view, but really from a reunion point of view. I said, Kevin, the time that you and I spent together and the time that I worked with your lovely wife, Mark, I always look at you as my first boss, one of my first bosses there with the PT crew. And then one of the most influential people in my professional career because you set the tone and you made me believe that I'd come to the right department for the right reason. And it was really your mindset and your attention to detail and really your fun cruelty that made me want to be the best officer that I could. So I thank you both. I want you to stay safe, and I'm looking forward to talking with you guys both or individually, sometime in the not too near future. So with that said, thank you so much. Thanks for watching Your Leo Nation. Subscribe, share, send, comment. Love to hear your comments. I love to respond to the ones that disagree with. Those are the most fun. God bless you all. We'll see you here next time in Your Leo Nation. I am the Chief, Mark Garrett. Take care.